Okay, a little different format today. We're still going to be going over physiology. Last time you remember we talked about the cardiac cycle. We talked about pressure, volume, EKGs, valves, relationship to what's going on in the heart during any specific time. We're going to focus on pressure and volume today. We have pressure on the y-axis and volume on the x-axis down here. I have points labeled A, B, C, D on what looks like a tombstone, but this is actually just pressure and volume, the pressure-volume relationship during one cycle of the left ventricle. So you can imagine down here we have A, so our pressure is increasing, or our volume is increasing to its maximal low. This is going to be when the mitral valve closes and the ventricle is contracting. So the ventricle is contracting all on this line up here. Pressure is going to be increasing until it overcomes this is the aortic pressure right here that's keeping the aortic valve closed. So this is going to open once it reaches that pressure. So we'll just say aortic valve opens, and this is when blood is going to start going out into the aorta. So we have a pressure increase that's going to come all the way over here. Once our contraction is done, we are going to have this aortic valve close. That's when the pressure in the aorta is greater than the pressure in the left ventricle. Once that's closed, you'll have relaxation of that ventricle. It's going to open up, pressure is going to drop really quickly. And then once it reaches a pressure that is equal to the atrium, those atrial valves are going to open, so that mitral valve is going to open. We'll just draw another one out here. So mitral valve opens. This is going to be your end systolic pressure down here. And then your end, let's see here. Yeah, and then this is going to be your diastolic filling. So this is passive filling of the ventricle. This in between here, you can think, so this is going to be our end, let's see. This is going to be our end systolic pressure is going to be right here, and our end diastolic pressure is going to be right here. Sorry, this is going to be your end diastolic. This is going to be your end diastolic volume, end systolic volume, and diastolic volume. We can learn a lot with the measurements of these different things. Stroke volume, we know that stroke volume is the end diastolic volume minus the end systolic volume. So that's going to be represented in this right here. So we're going to have all the way over here. This is going to be stroke volume. From that, we can determine also the ejection fraction. Ejection fraction is going to equal the stroke volume divided by the end diastolic volume. And this is going to tell you the percent of end diastolic volume that is pumped out each heartbeat. Cardiac output, we can also measure cardiac output. Cardiac output is going to equal the heart rate times stroke volume. So for that, we will need to know the heart rate, but we can calculate that. And there's a few things that can change the stroke volume. Let me talk about really quick some of those things. So we have preload. What preload is saying is that we're going to have a greater return. So preload, we're always going to be talking about volume. So if we had a greater preload, you can imagine that our line would be somewhere out here with a greater volume of blood. And if we had that, you could see that our stroke volume would increase just by increasing our preload. We can also increase our stroke volume by increasing inotropy. Inotropy is a line that's measured. We measure the slope of the line, and it goes from here, this point down here, to a point on the graph that's zero pressure and not quite zero volume. But we measure this slope, and this is inotropy. So this is the strength of contraction of the heart. And the steeper this slope, the greater the calcium input into the cell, and the greater contraction it's going to have. So you can imagine if we had a increase in inotropy with the same amount of preload, we would have a line that comes over here. If we had a line that came over there, we would have a line that came down here, and we would have increased slope of the inotropy line. We would have increased inotropy, increased stroke volume. Not always the case. We can have what's over here, this part. So when the blood is coming out of the left ventricle, this is called afterload. The pressure, afterload is pressure. Remember, preload is volume, afterload is pressure. So when we're coming out here, this is our afterload, anything that's trying to prevent the blood from going out into the aorta. So if we have a bigger afterload, we will have a higher pressure up here. And if we have a higher pressure up here, then we can have a strong contraction, but at the same time, we will not get as much blood out, because with the heart contracting stronger, by the time it equalizes pressure in the aorta, there's going to be larger volume still remaining in the left ventricle. That door is going to close, the semilunar valve is going to close, and you're going to have a larger end systolic volume in the left ventricle if you have increased afterload. You could have increased, like I said, this could be the same inotropy, but it would still be a smaller stroke volume. So afterload can determine that as well. Yeah, I think that's it. We can talk about things kind of down the system that will play into this as well. Let me just see what we're supposed to talk about really quick. Pull it up on my computer. Okay. And of course, you remember, I think last time we talked about inotropy, different things that affected inotropy. Any beta-1 stimulation, so catecholamines in the blood system, catecholamines through neurons, sympathetic neurons to the heart, those are going to increase inotropy. Chronotropy, you remember, is going to be just heart rate. So we can slow it down, we can have negative chronotropy, and we can speed it up, positive chronotropy. But we talked about that last time, so I won't really go into depth with it this time. Afterload and preload, we mentioned that. The big thing to remember, afterload is going to be pressure, preload is going to be volume. We can talk a little bit about also as well the baroreceptor reflex. So I can draw really quick. I can draw, or I might have it drawn out already. Yeah, I have it drawn out, so we'll just explain it. So this is a baroreceptor reflex, and I'll tell you a little bit of this. So this is the heart down here. We have our um, our our SA node, and down here would be our AV node. And I have a whole bunch of different things drawn. We'll kind of go step by step here. So we have the heart. This is going to be the semilunar valve right here. We'll draw in some lines so we know that's a valve. So this is going to be our aorta. In our aorta, we have some arteries that are going to go up into the head. There are carotid arteries. And on these carotid arteries, you have what's called a baroreceptor. Baro is going to be pressure. You can remember that if you've ever heard of a barometer. Barometers measure the atmospheric pressure. But these are the barometers for our circulatory system. These baroreceptors will measure pressure and they will respond accordingly. So they have a direct connection to the medulla oblongata in the midbrain. And if they sense an increase in or a decrease in blood pressure, they'll say, okay, we need to do couple things. We need to pump this heart faster, and we need to pump this heart stronger. And so what it will say is we'll have some sympathetic neurons here that's going to come to this SA node, and it's going to say we need to pump faster. And so it's going to start pumping faster. You remember the sympathetic system uses catecholamines, so epinephrine, norepinephrine. And it's going to say we need to pump faster. It's also going to come down here. It's going to go into the sympathetic chain ganglion, if you remember a little bit about how that works. It's going to go in there, it's going to synapse, it's going to come out, and it's going to go over all the heart muscle, and it's going to say we need to contract stronger. We need to build the pressure, the blood pressure in our body. So it's going to contract stronger. And then we're also going to have another system down here, and it's going to go down through, this is the madrenomedulla pathway. You'll remember this because it doesn't really synapse anywhere. It goes down here, it goes through the sympathetic chain ganglion, through the this is another ganglion. I can't remember the name of it right now, but it's just out in the body. I don't think it's a peripheral ganglion, but let's call that a peripheral ganglion. And then it's going to go through the peripheral ganglion. It's going to go to the madrenomedulla. It's going to synapse there. The madrenomedulla is going to release, you guessed it, epinephrine, norepinephrine, which is going to go into the blood. If you remember what's in our blood vessels, we have what is alpha 1 receptors in our blood vessels. Alpha 1, we remember 1 is going to cause an action. It's going to be a positive effect. So it's going to cause actually vasoconstriction in the blood vessels, which is also going to help bring our blood pressure up. So sympathetic response, increase heart rate via sympathetic neurons, increase inotropy via sympathetic neurons, increases vasoconstriction via adrenal medulla, epinephrine, norepinephrine, increase heart rate and inotropy via circulating catecholamines. If these sensors say, whoa, we are pumping blood way too hard, our blood pressure is way too high, it's going to detect that. It's going to send it to the brain. You remember the parasympathetic division. The parasympathetic division doesn't have any control over the blood vessels. That's only sympathetic, it's alpha 1 receptors, but it does have, it can dial that down so we can release less epinephrine, norepinephrine, but we do have control of this right here, the heart rate, and also the heart contractile cells. So it's going to go back here. It's going to tell the midbrain, there's a circulatory control center in the midbrain. It's going to say, hey, we are beating too hard, our blood pressure is too high, and so we got to remedy it. So what it's going to do, it's going to send a parasympathetic fiber. Remember, that's the vagus nerve. So we're going to send the vagus nerve back over here. We're going to say, hey, slow down. So this SA node is going to slow down. It's also going to send this parasympathetic to and that wouldn't go through the sympathetic chain ganglion. That would just go out. It would go down here to the heart muscles, and it would say, hey, we need to not contract as hard. If you remember, on the heart we have muscarinic 2 receptors. Muscarinic 2, we can think of even. Even's going to turn things down, and it's going to stimulate that. So we're going to turn down the heart, and we're going to lower our blood pressure a little bit. There's a couple different, okay. So that's that. We're going to talk about mean arterial pressure really quick, and I'll just explain. I have some notes here already. We're just going to go through some things. So mean arterial pressure, you can see right here, that can be found by measuring the cardiac output times the peripheral resistance. We can also find it by measuring the diastolic blood pressure plus 1/3 of the systolic blood pressure minus the diastolic blood pressure. That will give us the mean arterial pressure. And we are going to talk about the big thing. We have the flow rate, and this is what we're talking about when we're talking about pressure in the system flowing through the circulatory system, arteries, arterioles, capillaries, veins. I guess it would be mainly just the arteries and the arterioles. We're specifically talking about things that we can change. So we have the change in pressure, pi r4 8 volume, and let me see really quick, I can't remember what this other one stands for. Okay, nothing's jumping out on me, out at me just in my notes. So these ones aren't super important. The one that I really want to point your attention to is this radius to the fourth power. So we can think that if we have a radius to the fourth power, this is super uber important in regulating our blood pressure. And luckily for us, we have arteries, arterioles, smooth muscle lined vessels that are able to constrict and relax, so we can change the resistance, and the resistance change the radius. We can also change the resistance, but when we change the radius, we change it to the fourth power. So we can think if we get bigger by 2, then we're going 2 to the fourth power increase in flow. And if we get smaller by 2, then we're going to get 2 to the fourth decrease in flow. So these muscular arteries, these arterioles, they can change, and it can drastically affect our blood flow. And so that's one thing that's really important in our ability to regulate blood pressure, to regulate flow in our body. Okay, let's see what else we got to go over really quick. We're going to talk about sticking with. I'm just going to flip through my notes. It's easier than having me draw it all over again. We're going to talk about some capillary exchange. Capillary exchange can be a little bit tricky, but once you walk through it maybe once, and hopefully I can help you, it becomes pretty simple actually. Capillary exchange. So we have a capillary. We have an arterial end of the capillary. We have a venous end of the capillary. And between the arterial end and the venous end, we're going to have some exchange in some things. We're going to have some oxygen exchange, some CO2 exchange. We're going to have some byproducts from just basic metabolism, and these things are all going to get changed out. So when we think of blood exchange, there's a couple things that really go into it. So I have over here HP, and this is going to be your hydrostatic pressure. You could think of it as blood pressure, right? So if we have a blood pressure, an arterial end, we have a higher blood pressure, so we're going to have a 30 millimeters of mercury going out of the cell. And the best way to do that is, I'm going to scoot this up a little bit. We're going to say it's going out. So we have 30 going out. And then this is our BCOP. Our BCOP is our blood colloid osmotic pressure. In our blood, we have the main thing that we're going to talk about. We have molecules, but the main one we're talking about is albumin. Albumin is going to be responsible for maintaining our osmolarity in our blood. So if you remember way back, we talked about osmolarity. Water likes to follow the solutes, and in the blood we have some solutes, and we're going to say our osmolaric drive is going to pull water into the cell at a pressure of 28 millimeters of mercury. So let's say we got 28 coming into the capillary. So we have 30 out so far, 28 coming in. Now we have ICOP. So just like the blood, we also have interstitial, colloidal, osmotic pressure. That's going to be the solutes and different, yeah, I would say solutes. I can't think of another word right now, but there's going to be solutes out here in the interstitial space. And that's going to cause a pull of water outside the cell into this interstitial space. So there's going to be an 8 millimeter mercury pull out into the interstitial space. And this is going to be our interstitial fluid pressure. There's what's called lymphatics. Lymphatics, they're going to have a say in this, and they're going to have a suction. So they're kind of like the vacuum of the body. They kind of just suck up whatever doesn't get put back into the blood, and it eventually goes back up and it gets put into the subclavian artery. I can't remember if it's the right or left subclavian artery. So that's going to add another 3 to the out. So net, we have 28 in, 41 out. So our net pull, we're going to have 13 out. So 13 of nutrients, 13 of water, oxygen-containing material is going to be pulled out of the cells. It's going to go to the cells under venous end. We're going to have the same things. We're going to have hydrostatic pressure. We're going to have blood colloid osmotic pressure, interstitial colloid osmotic pressure, and we're going to have interstitial fluid pressure. And this is the big one here. This hydrostatic pressure in the vein, in the venules, or in the venous side of the capillaries, is a lot lower. Notice it's 10, where before we had 30. So we have 10 pushing out. Our blood colloid osmotic pressure, we have 28. So we got 28 coming in. Our ICOP is 8. It stays the same. We really don't change. Our IFP is going to stay the same at 3. Not really going to change. So we come down here. It's going to be 28 in, 10 out, 8 out, 3 out. Net 28 in, net 21 out. We're going to see a net 7 in. And now we compare these. I'll come down here. So we have 13 out, 7 in. So we're going to have overall a 6. You can't see it on my note, but we're going to have a 6 millimeters of mercury out that will travel through the lymph system. If you have a lymph system that is for some reason not working, if you have blockage, then you can get what's called lymphedema. Lymphedema will be swelling. You'll see it in the hands, but mainly you'll see it in the feet and the legs. That's where lymphedema is going to occur, just because you're going to have more fluids getting sucked out than your lymph can take in. So you're going to have swelling